Welcome to Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto, the podcast dedicated to focusing on the truth that is always evolving within us and around us, where we explore the potentiality of truth as a highly esteemed value at a time in history when most people have more on their plates than any one human should. If you're new to me, full expression is my jam. Some words people have used to describe me range from speaker, trainer, coach, healer, writer, spiritual advisor, teacher, podcaster, and someone even called me their soul Sherpa once. I'm less concerned with titles or labels and more interested in results, change, and creating a world we want to, can, and are proud to live in. A kinder, gentler, more curious, collaborative, reverent world where people respect each other's backgrounds, experiences, and truths. They trust in themselves, in life, and recognize that we need each other. And they know how to cultivate healthy relationships to true power, not the very unhealthy kind of power our current culture is predicated upon. Speaking of our culture, there's a lot of noise and ignorance in our current culture, and this show aims to cut through that by exploring the truths of a diverse range of incredible voices. From authors, artists, creatives, and educators to activists, speakers, and those in various scientific and esoteric fields, our guests hail from cultures and countries all over the world. We post a new interview every Monday, and if you want to keep up with the show notes and quotes from our guests, you can follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth D'Alto. You can expect a wide range of topics when you tune into this show. Everything from health, communication, money, success, parenting, desire, sex, love, and spirituality, to making pivots and transitions in life, and topics related to psychology, storytelling, gender and race issues, emotional intelligence, activism, advocacy, and much more. A few disclaimers. No episode of the show is meant for everyone, and every episode is meant for whoever needs it on the right day at the right time. Not all guest views will reflect my own, and that's intentional. We don't learn, grow, heal, or improve by staying in our comfortable bubbles with all of our people who look, think, or live exactly how we do. If you love what you hear and find it useful and inspiring, the best way to show your appreciation is to share the episode, subscribe to the show, and leave us a rating and review wherever you listen in from. Thank you so much for being here with me. Here we go. This is episode number 249 of Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto. I was really excited when today's guest, Kavitha Chinnaiyan, reached out about sharing her new book with me, Shakti Rising. As many of you know, I love studying archetypes and have deep appreciation for stories and mythology about goddesses. As well, her big truth kicked off our chat with a bit of mystery, which I also always love. Her truth was, there is much more to life than what we see. From there, we explored how we're all far more than our limited identities, how yoga and spirituality stemmed from being men's practices, and few spiritual paths are tailored for women, with those that are traditionally being quite hidden. We talked about her intentions for writing her book, to clarify conversations around the divine feminine and what the goddess actually is. And I loved this line that she said, "There's nothing in existence that isn't her." We got into making your life your practice and navigating spiritual materialism and elitism along the way. And she also shared some of the differences between her spiritual beliefs and her husband's, and how they instill beliefs, practices, and rituals with their kids despite any differences. I loved this chat, and I hope you do too. If you have not yet checked out the trust assessment, head on over to thetrustassessment.com. As well, we do have some spots still available for our Malibu in May, Chicago in August, and Asheville, North Carolina in October Wild Soul Movement Weekend Workshops. You can visit and find out information for those at wildsoulmovement.com/workshops. And last but not least, if you love this show, if you get a ton out of it, if you find yourself sharing it with your friends all the time, first of all, I know a lot of you do because you send me messages in our email inbox and on Instagram and things like that all the time. If you have not yet logged into iTunes and hit the subscribe button or left us a rating or a review, it would be amazing if you could take a moment to do that. It helps us out tremendously, and it also helps other people like you who might totally want and need and love this show to discover that it exists. So thank you so much, and let's get into today's episode. Welcome to episode number 251 of the show. I have Kavitha Chinnaiyan with us today, and I'm really excited about this. Those of you who've been listening for any length of time have heard me refer to one of my favorite books Awakening Shakti. And I think that's actually probably why Kavitha had reached out to me originally many, many, many months ago to review her book, Shakti Rising. So we're going to get all up in that conversation today, which is always fun, always illuminating, always enlightening, especially in a lot of cases, especially for the women listening, but not always. I think this could be illuminating as well for men and non-binary people. But Kavitha, the first question is, what is a big truth? What is a truth that's having a big impact on your life right now?
The big truth, the big truth I would say is that there is much more to life than what we see, and much more to being alive than what we give importance to.
I love that. I take some notes when people say amazing things, and that was pretty amazing. So, and I think this is a really good, one of the things I was most interested in talking to you about is you're a medical doctor by profession, and I was literally just listening to the Marianne Williamson's audiobook, A Woman's Worth. And I've actually never, this will be the first Marianne Williamson book I ever finish. I've started a handful of her books I've never finished. But one of the things that she was talking about is how, because this culture teaches us to value so much what we do over who we are, that's a huge, huge, huge conflict for women. So I'm curious of that intersection for you between what you do and who you actually are and what led you to writing a book called Shakti Rising.
Yeah, that's actually such a good point, that conflict between being and becoming. And it's I can see how that is a conflict, particularly for women, because who we are has somehow not been enough, for centuries. And so what we have naturally tended to do is that we have tended to take on the becoming that we are most familiar with, which is that of men. And so, we get into these modes of wanting to prove ourselves and to be as good as a man. And in that process, we kind of lose touch with who we really are. And I mean that on several layers, who we really are, as in the one thing that's common to men and women, which is that we are far more than our limited identity, which is true for everybody. But also, particularly for women, it is losing touch with our own bodies and our own, ways of being that are somehow not acceptable in society. And I know this, I know this from my career and from my choices that I have made, which is always, driven to prove myself in so many different ways, and really coming to a standstill at one point that none of that was working, and it was never going to work, no matter how successful I was going to be and how successful I had already been up to that point. It was never going to really fill that void, which was of letting go of that and becoming more and more acquainted with, and more familiar with being me and being a woman, being this embodied person, and unique in so many ways, and yet similar in so many ways to everybody else.
Yeah. So what kind of doctor are you, and how did you decide to write this book?
I'm a cardiologist, and so the way this book came about is, through my own personal journey, spiritual journey, which began many years ago, decades ago, in the world of yoga and Vedanta and so on. And even spirituality had become more of a man's game, and I think many of those who are listening could probably relate to this, which is, if you look at spirituality in general, it is really not, it's not really tailored for women. Very few paths are actually tailored for women, and those are hidden. They are not really well known. And so we take on this garb spirituality as well, and we're doing it like a man does. And it so happened that many years ago, I had been on this path of Advaita Vedanta for many years, and I was meditating and had this voice basically tell me to take up Sri Vidya sadhana, which is the path of the goddess. And I had no idea about it. I didn't know what it was, and I started researching it, and it just called to me. And then it in retrospect, it all made sense, because everything I had studied until then really started to make sense in a very different way.
So you brought the feminine principle into everything that you already studied and understood and had been practicing and applying, and it clicked into place. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, it clicked into place, and that practice of working with Shakti, through my particular path of Sri Vidya, just opened me to this, this understanding what Shakti really is. And it's a lifelong process. I don't think anyone can ever say they've understood that. Writing actually was more of a meditative practice. It just flowed. It was nothing I had planned. I had no plans of writing a book on Shakti. It just happened. And, I was writing blog posts as I was working with each goddess of the 10 Mahavidyas. And people who are reading the blog said, can you elaborate on this? Can you write more? And so it just turned into a book.
I love that it was a literal calling for you. Like, it was an invitation. You just kept getting invited and just kept doing what you were invited to do. So
yeah,
I'm still really curious. I want to be mindful of cultural appropriation, right?
Yes.
And I'm curious to your opinion. So were you raised, because you said, sounds like this was a chosen spiritual path for you, not what you were raised with, correct? Or is there more of a story there?
Yeah. I think that's a very important thing, because, of course, I grew up in India. I was born in India. I grew up there, and none of this was actually that new for me. In India, goddess worship is very common, but I was never really called to it. For me, God was always masculine.
Yeah.
And because of my culture and my familial background and so on, it just didn't appeal to me for whatever reason. And I think that also has a lot to do with how I was viewing myself as a woman, as a female, and really paying more attention to God being masculine.
Yeah.
So, and of course, these things, these concepts of masculine and feminine really don't make sense ultimately. But something for us to understand as a beginning, that, it was, a lot of this wasn't familiar to me.
Yeah.
And this is all that came later.
And I appreciate that point of you saying it doesn't really make sense, masculine and feminine, but it's a good beginning. And I agree with you, because I think especially looking at it as archetypes and energies, and, learning about the goddesses or learning about the gods, something I was thinking about, actually, I woke up very early this morning and I was thinking about this interview, and I was thinking about how Christianity is kind of like the religion of the world. I'm putting that in air quotes for people who were listening. I think probably like the most common. Statistically, I don't know if it is anymore now in 2018, but it has been for many, many, many centuries. And it's just so funny to me, being raised in Christianity, that there are some insane stories in the Bible, right? Like, Jesus turns water to wine. He makes fishes out of loaves. He walks on water. Meanwhile, as I was beginning to study Hindu mythology many years ago and read about other world religions and gods and goddesses and their pantheons, I'm like, oh, these stories are amazing. And I'm like, interesting to me, the disconnect that I took the Bible oh yeah, that definitely happened. And then I'm reading these other stories going, oh, what a nice myth. And realizing either way, regardless of what anyone believes, we could all zoom out. Yes. And look at the stories for the meaning and the depth and the richness and the lessons that's available there, and the mystery, the freaking mysteries. So how how is that for you? How do you relate to, what's the word I want to say? It's not gleaning insight, extracting, thank you. Extracting the meaning that you need at any particular time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Makes so much sense. And I think that's a very good point. You know, our Hindu mythology particularly is like replete with these stories. You know, the Puranas are thousands and thousands of these stories. And it doesn't matter where we are putting our attention to and saying, well, here in this tradition, for instance, if I'm going to be really a Shakti worshiper, then there are thousands of stories about Shakti being the supreme, the supreme universal power. And then if Shiva is the, if we are talking about Shiva, then he is the supreme power and everything revolves around him. So in any of these stories, the fundamental thing is always that lesson that you were talking about. What do you gain from that? If you hear about a story where so-and-so did such and such a thing and was saved at the last minute by so and so, then it's really like, how am I doing that? How am I playing this out in my own psyche? And that's always very interesting to see, because no matter what story you take from the Puranas, we can always see it being enacted in our own minds, in our own psyches. It's fascinating, actually.
And to me, and I'd love your opinion on this, this is my answer to the cultural appropriation conundrum, right? I'm not practicing, I'm not like taking someone else's religion. I'm also not really out in the world saying like, this is my thing. I'm personally, I'm very clear about like what I get from it and what I glean from it. But how do you feel about that? Because I mean, you wrote a book. When you write a book, you're giving something into the world. And so I guess maybe a great place to start with your answer to this is, who did you intend this book to be for?
Yeah. So this book, when it was flowing out of me is a better word than saying when I was writing it, because
I love that. And I'm also envious because my book was arduous. So I'm so jealous that it was just like coming right through you. That is amazing.
Thank you. So it's and you read it. So it has, I wrote it basically to clear up the misunderstanding of what the goddess is.
Yeah.
That's the number one thing. Because, we have a lot of baggage around the goddess. If you ask somebody, for instance, to define a goddess, and this seems to be very popular in our culture right now, be the goddess, or the resurgence of the divine feminine, and so much misunderstanding around that, right?
Yeah.
And when we talk about, okay, how do you define the goddess? And it's so interesting to see that the definition of the goddess comes from men. Right. Yeah. So this goddess is has this definition of beauty that is appropriated by men, and the sensuality, and she's the perfect lover, the perfect mother, and is gorgeous and has this flowing hair and whatever it is that we attribute to the goddess, and all of that comes from this male definition of beauty and power and being feminine. But with the Mahavidyas, you shatter all such misconceptions, because they, the Kali is the most famous of them. There is nothing in there that fits that definition of beauty or femininity, right? And yet she is the primordial Shakti, the source from which everything comes, right? And so understanding that the divine is both, it encompasses all of dualities, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, the desirable and not so desirable. All of that is her. There is nothing in existence that isn't her, right? So these goddesses actually shatter all these things about well, it's only the light that is, the goddess, and the dark is something else. Well, no, the shadow and the light, they're both aspects of the same, divine Shakti. So that was the purpose of writing that too, and for anybody that wanted to see it that way. So, be it women or men, because it's even men, even though, we say women and men, all of us are aspects of Shakti, so, so it's relevant to everybody.
And it's even funny to say, like, as we're saying, the definition of, it's an undefinable thing. We can do our best to use our finite system of human language to describe a thing that's indescribable. But ultimately, I believe it's felt. It's embodied. It's, when you're outside, when you're in nature, when you are making love, when you're dancing, when there's music, there's this embodiment of it. So I'm curious for you, where or how do you most feel connected?
I don't have any particular instances where I feel that connection, because it's like an ongoing moment to moment kind of awareness and inquiry into, I'm feeling this contraction. I'm feeling lousy about something. Yes, this is her too. And I'm feeling light and free about this. This is her too. Ultimately, what Shakti really wants for us to do is to see that we are not separate from her, that we are her. And for that, we have to, transcend our limitations, our egoic little pettiness and our storylines and so on that we think we are. And when we get past that, then we see the magnificence of who we truly are.
And how do you integrate this into being a cardiologist? I feel like you're in a very traditional role. And something I'm really obsessed with, so the timing of this interview is awesome, is I call it spiritual special ops, right? Mm-hmm. I think there's this whole big coaching industry. There's this whole big new age movement, spirituality, people. There's a lot of seekers and searchers and enthusiasts. But there's also people who, go to their 9-to-5 jobs, or they're working in a medical profession, they're working in a traditional place, but they're still studying and embodying these principles and getting to be amazing humans out in the world doing traditional things. And so you get to shine the light, you get to hold space for the darker side of things. So I'm so curious how what you know and who you are and what you embody, embrace, and studied and have written about in the book shows up for you in the day-to-day, and especially at your job.
Yeah, that's such a good question. At a particular point in our path, whatever path we may be on, there is a nice little division between your practice and life. Mm-hmm. There is this practice you go meditate, you do whatever, and then you go live your life, and then you come back and you practice, and then you go live your life. At some point, that distinction actually fades away. Mm-hmm. Your life is your practice, and it's in every moment, right? It's how I talk to people, how I listen to people, how I examine them, how I talk to my children, or how I talk to my husband, or, the daily annoyances of I'm in Michigan and there's a lot of snow and, being stuck in traffic. That is the practice. At the moment, that is it, and so there isn't like a nice little separation. It's like, it's ongoing 24/7, Yeah.
And so for anyone listening who might be earlier on their path, can you remember, and you might not, it's okay if you don't, but what changed? I guess I'm curious. Can you think of times, can you give us some examples of how you used to respond to things like being in traffic, or how you used to respond to people or speak to people or talk to your kids or your husband before that line blurred between practice and life and it kind of all became one thing?
Yeah. And for that, I think we need to talk a little bit about this Kundalini. Mm-hmm. So you're aware of it, of course, and a lot of people are aware of what this is. This is the primal life force, the energy that remains dormant in most of us because we are functioning from that dualistic mindset. The energy is going in; it's very diffuse, and and then, of course, people have had this activation of this Kundalini and have had a lot of these energetic symptoms and so on. And we normally ascribe those kinds of symptoms to Kundalini awakening, but that's not it. So Kundalini awakening is really, Kundalini becomes active when your sadhana or your practice becomes, it takes center stage. Everything else comes second. So that shift is something that cannot be forced, where you have your life, you have your priorities, and then there is the spiritual practice. And then that shifts at one point where this is it. Everything else is secondary. Yeah. And when that happens, when that shift happens, that's when all of life begins to shift. And it starts changing actually even externally, because how we relate to others, of course, changes, but how people change as a result of that, it can be subtle, but it's going on, and you don't realize what a wave of effect you can have from that shift in perspective and that shift in priority.
I'm so glad you're making this. There's 2 points I'm really glad you just made. I'll go with the one that you just made so I don't lose my train of thought. The wave, the ripple effect, I always call it, that you can have by doing your own work. This is something people who have been listening to the show for a while might be rolling their eyes going, here she goes again about the ripple effect. But I'll never stop being in awe of this and having so much reverence for the fact that any work I do to improve my own life and my own experience is inextricably connected to the other people in my life, whether it's my family, my friends, loved ones, whether it's people who listen to this show. And so anyone listening can put that in your own context. All the people that you're connected to that are in your web of immediate human connection, they are impacted on an energetic level in one way or another. It is one of the most miraculous mysteries of them all, I think.
Yep, absolutely. And that's absolutely true. That's true in also my experience. But what happens as we kind of delve deeper and deeper into our own stuff is that we start to realize that, the invisible effects, of people that we don't know.
Yes.
And people will never know. Mm-hmm. But yet we have an effect on them. They have an effect on us. Somebody in some remote place in Africa doing something is going to have an effect on all of us, because we move as a web, as a whole. We never move individually, and yet we think we do. So the whole of creation moves as a web, as a whole, as one thing, as one organism.
And what's cool about putting this in the context of spirituality is that, for people who are in a different place with their consciousness or their beliefs, might hear you say something like that and actually think it's like narcissistic or egocentric to say, who does this person think she is? That she thinks something that she's doing is affecting people in Africa who don't even know who the hell she is, right? But it's actually not, because it's energy, it's that interconnectedness, and there's paradox to it, there's mystery to it, and there's such beauty to it if we can lift the ego a little bit and not worry about what it might sound like, but really kind of feel into the truth behind it, and that we're a fabric, this human family we're all part of, whether we want to be or not. So I know some of us are like, but what about that guy? Am I really connected to that guy? I want to be connected to that guy.
I want to be connected.
I want to be connected. This is reminding me right now of this hilarious meme I saw at some point last year. I think it was B.S. Iyengar. And he's doing, I think it's like some eagle pose, and has one eye open, and it says, I know we're all one, but I'm keeping my eye on a couple of you, or something like that. It was so awesome. What's up, beloved listeners? Quick break in the show to remind you that the trust assessment is alive, it is kicking, it is out in the world. And if you have not taken it yet, what exactly are you waiting for, friend? It's over at thetrustassessment.com. We've been receiving amazing feedback from the people who have been taking it since we put it out. And what's really cool is whether your trust in yourself is low, whether it's, medium, mid-level, so-so, or whether you have a lot of trust in yourself. In the reports that are associated with the assessment, you also get to learn a lot about how to apply trust in your life, the specific context for trust in the different areas of your life. There's a lot of information there from my many, many years of study, practice, observation, and experimentation with myself, with students, and with clients. So it's super useful. The resources beyond the free report are super inexpensive. There's an advanced report, there's a workshop. I have a bunch of workshops coming up in March and April. So if this is something that you're curious about, you want to know more about, whether you want to see how you could apply it in your own life, or maybe you have your own clients or your own people in your life. Maybe it's your children and you want to be showing them at an earlier start than you got how to trust themselves. There's some really useful and really valuable information for you within all of the resources that come after you complete that assessment. It takes about 5 minutes. So you need a little bit of time, and it's totally worth it. So again, head on over to thetrustassessment.com. Thank you so much for checking that out. If you love it and you want to share it with your people, we greatly appreciate that as well. And back to the show. But I want to come back to another thing that you said about the Kundalini awakening, because I spent almost 3 years living in what would label itself as a, quote, conscious spiritual community. And I'm super grateful for it because it really showed me like the underbelly of spirituality, or like the shadow side, as you talk about in your book. And one of those things is this, like, I'm just going to call it, for lack of a better term, spiritual elitism. Mm-hmm. And Kundalini awakening is one of the things that you hear people talk about, like it just happened. Like, I went to a thing and now I'm special because I had a Kundalini awakening. And they might not be saying I'm so special, but there's this air of superiority or enlightenment or special. You're laughing because you know exactly what I'm talking about. People listening probably know what I'm talking about. Some of us have actually done this and been the spiritual elitist at some point or the other. I think it's actually part of the path, which I'd like your opinion on in a second. But I'm just really glad you said that in context of like sadhana, which is deep practice. When that takes center stage, that's the awakening. An awakening happens over time. It's not like some big lightning flash moment. I know people have those moments. They have these activating moments, but that's not the awakening. That's like a seed in the journey of the awakening. And I'm just so thankful that you mentioned that.
Yeah. So here we are talking, in whether it's the Shakti, the path of Shakti that we are specifically discussing here. So ultimately the goal of this is to rise above our identification as the body mind. Okay, so that is the goal of it, because it is the identification with the body mind that keeps us from realizing who we really are, which is eternal bliss consciousness. So that identification with the body mind can take many forms. We can become identified with our roles, with our culture, with our political, views, or our cultural beliefs, or our gender, or whatever it may be. And so it isn't very difficult then. You can see how if we are, we are identifying ourselves as this, then, and we want to improve that and appear better, then having these spiritual experiences, somehow we think that makes us more superior, right? Because any identification we have with the body mind is always in comparison to others. So when you have this kind of, the fireworks kind of experiences, which I'll come back to later, but the kinds of experiences that people say they're having with Kundalini awakening and how they start to feel superior to everybody else, it's just letting go of one limited identity and taking on another.
Amen.
So, but that isn't to say that people don't have these things. And also, right. I have to say, not everybody has these kinds of symptoms, and it means nothing, ultimately. It doesn't mean anything, ultimately, because if that the fireworks kind of symptoms that one is having isn't leading to that release from that identification as the mind and body, then it's of no use, right? But if we keep that very tightly, meaning that, okay, this is me now. Now I've shedded I've shed my old identity and I've now taken on this new one. It actually means nothing because you're still limited.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy you're saying this. Keep going.
So, and also, why is it that some people don't have that? And so, in these paths of yoga and tantra, what we understand to be these kinds of symptoms is, understanding our nadis, these subtle energy channels that run through the body, and wherever these channels connect or come together, confluence, those confluence of those nadis is where the chakras are. The 7 chakras along the spine, but there are many more. But these kinds of symptoms, where people are shaking or having visions or having various symptoms from that Kundalini awakening, it actually happens more when there are more obstructions in those nadis. So if you don't have a lot of obstructions, you may probably not even feel any of that. That doesn't mean your Kundalini isn't active. So it doesn't mean that people who are having those symptoms are actually somehow, more advanced or anything. It's just that their channels are probably a little bit more obstructed and it's just working differently.
It's just making me laugh because I can't even tell you how it's like flashing before my eyes, all these experiences with all these people who really were wearing it like a badge of specialness. So to hear you say, actually, they're a little more obstructed. Again, it's not about being better than or worse than other people, but it's just, again, that ego identification and how it acts out. Like anyone making anything a tool or a case for them to be like special or superior is just like not, quote, spiritual. It's just not.
Yeah, it isn't. And it's no different than feeling inferior to somebody, right? I mean, it's the same thing, which is like we were talking about earlier with respect to women. And we've felt inferior for so many centuries. And so it isn't, feeling superior is no better than feeling inferior, because ultimately both of them are result from identification with the body-mind. And so, I talk a lot about this in the book, which is spiritual materialism.
Yes.
That's the word for this, where you let go of one kind of identity and you like even becoming part of a tribe, wanting to fit into a spiritual community and wanting that subtle, just, validation from others for being, so spiritual. All of that is part of this spiritual materialism.
Yeah. I love it so much. So how does this, in your own family units, how do you, it's really interesting. I was just having a conversation earlier today with my brother, who at the time of recording this, we're a couple months out from my first niece coming into the world. I'm so excited. And thank you. But he was saying, my parents, I was raised Catholic, and we were just talking about, what he thought the expectations my parents might have around baptizing the baby or taking the baby to church. That's not really my brother's belief system anymore. He hasn't gone to Catholic church in years. So I'm always just really curious how people are instilling or presenting belief systems in their family units. So how do you do that?
Yeah. So, one thing that happens on this path is that you can't rest until you're free from all of that. You're free from all those kinds of limiting beliefs and so on. So with my children, I don't give them a belief system. I just instead I ask them to inquire. So they meditate, and we have a lot of conversations around things that are happening in daily life, and when I'm doing something, I explain to them the reasoning behind it, because this is a problem when you don't understand the symbolism behind some of the rituals and things like that, then it just gets, very messy. And that's what happened with me. It's like, why are we doing all this? It doesn't even make any sense. And that questioning, of course, led me on my path, but that may not happen for my children. They might just get frustrated and say, I don't want any of this. But so I try to explain to them in very scientific, logical ways on how this affects them, how this affects us as a family, and how this affects us as a community and the world, and so on. So the beauty of this path, of Tantra, which is really what this whole book is based on, is that it's extremely logical. There isn't a belief system. It's completely logical. You just have to understand the logic. So it's very scientific, and that's why it appeals so much to me, because I'm a scientist, and, I can't work with beliefs. It's because anytime you say belief, there's always the probability that it may be wrong.
Yep.
So, beliefs don't really gel so much with me, because it's like, I want to find out for myself. And so that's what I recommend for my children too. It's like, don't take my word. Discover for yourself.
Yeah, I love that so much. How old are your kids?
They're 15 and 13.
And what kind of meditation do they do?
So I teach meditation. So I have a whole course on meditation on my website, and hundreds of people from all over the world have taken it. So with my children, I just have them do a breath meditation.
Cool.
But I also teach a mantra meditation and so on.
And so I would imagine, as a 13 and a 15-year-olds growing up in the U.S., in Michigan in 2018, maybe some of their other friends don't meditate.
Yeah.
How is that for your kids, reconciling this cool path that you've put them on? Cool is a very generalized word. I'm just going to perhaps different from the path that their friends are on. Is that a topic of conversation, especially at that age, right? At that age when you really care about fitting in and what's going on and being cool. Maybe that's why the word cool came out.
Yes. Of course, there's all of that. There is no free lunch, right? So as a parent, you have to deal with all of that. So they have their moments of doubt, and they have, a lot of it actually. Sometimes it's like, what does this even mean? And why am I doing that? But then, for instance, today, my younger daughter said, can we meditate now? And it just came from her. I was like, okay, because usually it's me saying, okay, let's do this. So, ultimately with my children, I have the same philosophy as with anybody else, which is that all of us are on our own paths, and nothing can be forced, not even with my children. So they are going to have to learn their own lessons, the way that life has in store for them. And so be it.
And how was that? So however many years that you've been studying, was that and practicing, was that your parenting style from day one?
Yeah, because, this path basically began when they were born. My children were born.
Cool.
So it's been constantly evolving. As I have evolved, my parenting style has evolved. I'm a cardiologist, so my personality is a type A, very, just like go kind of a personality, and that has shifted to allowing them to be who they are going to be rather than trying to control things. So that's a huge shift in my parenting style. Yeah.
And is your husband totally on board with all this too?
No, my husband's really not into, this spirituality like I am. And he has, he's a karma yogi, and has imbibed those basic principles, and he lives it, and that's it. He goes to work and does what he needs to do. So, but that really doesn't come between us. We just make it work.
That's awesome. I appreciate that, because it's a question that comes up a lot. Many weeks ago, my friend Julie Santiago was on, and she talked about, being on a spiritual path that her husband wasn't particularly on yet. He ended up kind of coming along for the ride. But I think that's a big burning question, especially for a lot of women who are doing this work being a big sweeping generalization with their partners and the people in their life going, but what happens? And again, I think that goes back to what you were talking about earlier. When we're identified with that body-mind,
right,
we are thinking that the other person needs to be on the same page as us in order for all of us to be happy.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be like that. You just, and one thing that happens is, it's natural progression. We kind of really hold on very tightly to our spiritual values and beliefs as we kind of get on the path. But along the way, we kind of lose all of that. It's
Yeah.
just, you're not so tight around those things and, about what anybody else should do, how the world should be, what should happen, shouldn't happen. You just kind of lose all that. It doesn't mean you don't care. You still care. You're still doing your part, but it just loses its ability to affect you in the same way.
Yeah. It's super interesting because just recently I decided to experiment with an online dating app. It's called The League, and it's one of the things that you do, it asks religion. And, there's all these categories, and then there's like atheist and agnostic, and then other. And so I clicked the other box for myself to describe myself, but then you could also check your preferences on what a potential match could be. And the only thing I unchecked was atheist, because for me personally, I don't care what someone believes in. I just care that they believe in something. I just feel like that's going to make it easier. But I really don't, I don't care what someone's context for what they believe in is, but just, I personally find, and I'd be curious your opinion on this, that when someone does have something to believe in that's bigger than themselves, in hard times especially, and really amazing times, that they're able to be grateful, or that they're able to surrender or trust or have some kind of faith and not feel like they have to hold everything themselves. For me, it just seems easier. Life.
Yeah.
When people believe in something. What is your opinion? And I'm not staunch on that. It's just like how I feel about it at the moment. What's your opinion on that?
I think it's very individual, because I would say, for instance, my husband is more agnostic than anything else. And it's great because, we're at least early on in my path, when I had all these beliefs and ideas, there was no conflict where he had his own, and then we are butting heads about that. But as long as we are not dogmatic about anything, I think that's it. It's like live and let live.
Totally.
You do what you have to do, and that is true even in an intimate relationship, isn't it? It's like you have to give the other person freedom to do what they are going to do and who they are going to be. Even though we're walking together, we actually, this path, the spiritual path, I would say, is a lonely path. You have to walk it alone. There is nobody who can walk it with you. It doesn't matter who that is. Whether it's your teacher or your partner or your children. No, you have to walk it alone.
It's so true. That literally, for people watching, they saw it just gave me like a full body chill when you said that. It's, this at this point in my life, I've now been single for almost a year and a half, and I've been relishing in this time on my own. And I've had people ask me, do you ever feel lonely? And I'm like, I really don't, because I'm never alone because of my spiritual practices and my faith in what I believe in. Like, I'm talking to whomever I talk to all freaking day long, I'm out by the beach in nature. I feel like I'm surrounded by hordes of all kinds of interesting beings. Not to be like weird or esoteric about it. I'm just not being specific because this is your interview. This is not about me. But it's just, that's something I really appreciate about having some kind of faith and some kind of spirituality as well. So, okay, what else specifically that's in the book that I haven't asked you about do you really want to share with us?
Well, I think, in the book, I go into various kind of little nuances about the spiritual path and stuff that we don't really think about. For instance, our definition of nonviolence, for instance, or how we go about discovering the truth within ourselves. And all of these, how I was led to write this book is to assign one of the 10 yamas and niyamas from the Yoga Sutras to the 10 goddesses. So these yamas and niyamas are like the ethical codes. They are the non-violence and truth and self-reflection and so on. And it just happens to be that each of these goddesses represents one of those things very beautifully. For instance, Kali, who is extremely violent, the way she looks, her light is nonviolence, and so how does that happen? And we can't understand that unless we get into the symbolism of what Kali really is talking about, or who she stands for, what she stands for, and so on. So there are aspects of spirituality, such as spiritual bypassing, for instance. How do we deal with that? How do we recognize that within ourselves? Very important, because we are always trying to defend our egos and not get to those vulnerable places. We just kind of push that away, and in the name of a spiritual belief or a path or a practice, and that work never gets done when we do that. We can say all we want about how advanced we are, but who cares?
Who cares?
Right? There is no prize at the end of it.
Right. This is a great point. No one is like, there's no spiritual Olympics where someone's going to be like, oh, gold medal for you.
Not at all. So, and having that kind of vulnerability and that honesty with ourselves about where we happen to be at any given point, you would think that that's easy, but it isn't. Yeah. It's very hard to do. And as we kind of peel away our own stuff, it feels like there are more and more layers, It's like a never-ending peeling that goes on.
So many layers.
Yeah.
I love this. And this is what I really enjoyed about your book when I was going through it. I love the symbolism. Again, everyone listening knows I'm a huge dork. I love learning, and I love the layers, right? So I love that you're a scientist, because I've never identified as like a science-minded person, but I totally am, because everything is an experiment. Everything is try it for yourself, even with my clients and my women in my programs. And like, you got to try it. You got to test it, because you're a different... Yep. Every single one of us is a unique individual. So this works for me. This has worked for hundreds of other people who have done this course, but you got to try it out. There's only one way to validate an answer.
Absolutely. And this is the thing, I just saw a patient this morning, and this woman who's having so many problems, and none of our medications were working, and so on. So, and I'm trained in Ayurveda as well. And I had been telling her, maybe how about trying something else? And she wasn't really very open to it initially, but then her symptoms got to a point where she was like ready to try anything.
Yeah.
And so, I put her on this whole protocol of lifestyle changes and this and that. And today she came in and she said, I can't believe how good I feel. I've never felt this way before. And I said, see, that's the thing, right? You have to try it.
Yeah.
You have, whatever you do, you have to try it for yourself. Don't take my word for it.
Yeah.
Because anything I might have said about how you're going to feel is irrelevant, because you're the one that has to do it.
Yep. Yeah. I love that point, by the way, that her symptoms had to get bad enough for her to be like, I'll try anything. If anyone listening could just take that in, don't be the person whose symptoms have to get bad enough that you're forced into, it's not surrender, it's more like submission, right?
Yes. And it so happens that we are so innocently caught up in our lives, and it's all very innocently done, Ultimately, we are all victims of the same thing. It doesn't matter what our skin color is, or where we come from, or what our belief systems are. Our fundamental error is that we think we are this body-mind. And we do anything to hang on to that, And so it's innocently done. And that kind of needs to shatter sometimes in order to say, well, wait, something's not working. I need to look at my life in a different way. Yeah. And I feel like those are really acts of faith and of grace, really. The descent of grace when you come to a point where nothing is working. right? Nothing is working. And I have been in those places of despair before. I'm sure you have, and many others who are listening, is whatever I'm doing isn't working. So it's like a moment of grace is that, okay, change it then.
Yeah.
Look somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That is an excellent point to wrap up on. And now I want to ask you some completely not necessarily meaningful, unrelated questions to anything. Cool? Do you watch TV?
I do.
What are like?
I usually tend. I tend to watch whatever my kids are watching.
So what's that right now?
So for a while, we were binging on Stranger Things on Netflix.
Yep.
And we love these superhero kind of shows and movies. So we watched Merlin, I think 5 times, the whole 5 seasons of it.
Oh, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Series. Oh, it's amazing. It's old. It's on Netflix. It's a BBC show. It's fabulous.
Oh, I want to look that up.
And yeah, I think you'd love it if you like that kind of thing. And so we did that, and then my daughters are very much into Flash and the Arrow, so we watch a lot of that. So yeah,
that's awesome. Are you reading anything right now? Any books?
Yeah, I am actually reading. It's nothing fun, unfortunately. It's not fiction. I'm usually reading, books from or texts from the different tantric traditions, and I'm reading this beautiful text of Kashmir Shaivism called the Pratyabhignya Hridayam. So I'm reading that and studying that.
Cool. And then music, what do you listen to?
I have a very eclectic taste. So I love Indian classical music. I love, a lot of instrumental classical music kind of things. And then, of course, I listen to whatever my kids are listening to, which is a lot of pop.
Is it bad? How is it? Like, I don't listen to any current pop. Is it bad? I don't know why I assume it's bad.
Well, some of it is questionable. I ask, what is this? What is this person even saying? I don't even get it. But these are conversations we have in the car. They're like, "Mom, you're so out of it. You need to get with the times."
Right? I think about that because occasionally, like, the only time I ever am listening to any kind of like pop music would be if I was in my car, right? But I'm usually on Spotify, and I'm usually just listening to like my music. And it dawned on me a couple weeks ago that I'm kind of now like my parents, right? Because my parents would listen to their music.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, as I was growing up, my music was just like whatever was on the radio. But at a certain point, like it kind of stopped after like early 2000s hip hop. And then I was like, I don't really want to listen to new stuff anymore. So that's really funny. I don't even know what's out there. So amazing.
Yeah, for a while, the last few weeks, we've been listening to a lot of ABBA, both my children and me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because I used to like that when I was a kid, and then they thought it was all old-fashioned. And suddenly, my older one's a musician, and she sings, and she thought, wow, these songs are actually very nice to sing.
Cool.
I'm like, see, what did I tell you?
Told you. It's good stuff. I love that. Well, Kavitha, I loved this. Thank you so much. I appreciate who you are and like your grounded energy, and that you do blend science with spirituality. But what I appreciate more than anything is like the deep practice. There's nothing to me more relaxing than being around a person who has a deep practice, because they're not judging you. They don't need anything from you. They are themselves, and they're cool with whatever goes down. Like, it's so enjoyable to be around and to have a conversation with someone like you. So the name of the book is Shakti Rising. What is your website? Tell the people.
It's kavithamd.com. So KavithaMD.com.
Great. And we'll put links also to the book. We'll put links to the show notes. Check it out if you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Kavitha, thank you so, so much. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
So
like for the longest time, I wasn't comfortable. Like, so when I'm with the analyst people, I just talk about analysts, analyzing data and all that. When I'm with the creative people, I talk about I never mention the other part of me until the play happened, because then my coworkers came and watched the play.
And were they like, what the hell?
Yeah. they're like, wait, you're an analyst and what the heck? Like, how did you? Yeah. And then my actors and the people who were helping me with the play knew I had a full-time job that has nothing to do with the play. So yeah, that's when I was like, you know what? I'm done trying to like hide. I'm interested in all of that, and I'm doing all of that, and I'm okay with it, and it's okay in my standards, and whatever. Leave me alone.
I appreciate that a lot. And when you say leave me alone, did anyone actually bug you about it, or were you in your head thinking that they would?
Yeah, in my head, or sometimes comments like, "Oh, you're doing too much," or "Slow down," or stuff like that. And I would sometimes think about it. I'm like, "Am I doing too much?" Like, okay, yeah, I'm aware when I'm overwhelmed, and I'm aware when I need to like prioritize, but I'm okay. Thank you. Like, I'm not doing too much. I want to do all this stuff, and I'm still okay. Like, I'll let you know when I can't handle it anymore. Yeah.